Okay, thanks everyone for hanging around. These are the perils of throwing an event on a Friday afternoon when it's sunny and beautiful out. But I promise you, you don't want to miss this. And we're going to run through a quick presentation from the AER and open to some questions quickly from the audience. It's actually really my treat to be able to introduce Paul Forenzovich and Shelley Ewan, mainly because I'll just tell a quick personal story. When I was in grad school, I was working on taxi cab regulation and writing these this was when it was an interesting question. It's not an interesting question anymore. But I was writing these negative pieces about bad regulation that doesn't benefit the public, that, regulatory capture. And then my friend said, okay, you finished your degree, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to go work for the regulator. And so I went and I joined the Alberta Energy Regulator. And one of the very first things on my desk were, four things. It was just one piece of paper. We're going to be a protective regulator. We're going to be a credible regulator. We're going to be an effective regulator. But the thing that caught my eye is we're going to be an efficient regulator. And then so Paul, who leads up their senior corporate planning thing, he was a real kind of mentor for me because it was interesting. There was all these old regulations on the books. It was easy to get rid of some of the redundant ones, but he was kind of the first person who sort of said, well, yeah, we got rid of the low-hanging fruit. Why don't we get a ladder and try to reach up to some of the medium-hanging fruit and some of the even fruit at the top? And they did that at a time when they were erecting occasional fences that were making it harder to get fruit and stuff like that, but they were balancing really the trade-offs around energy and efficiency. And Shelley, I didn't get a chance to work with her that closely, but I will say she's from Maple Ridge, British Columbia, which if you guys don't know, it's sort of the baseball capital of Canada. And they always get into the Little League World Series. So me growing up in Regina, Saskatchewan, I always said, oh, if I was only growing up in Maple Ridge, I could play for that Little League World Series team. So I'm going to hand it over to them. And Shelley's the director of the Integrated Application Decision Approach. And I think some of this technology really helps kind of square the circle around the problems that modern regulators are facing and how to be both efficient and protect the environment. So Paul and Shelley, have at it.
Thanks, Ben, and Laura, thanks for inviting us. I think, as Ben mentioned, a lot of the discussion that we've heard today will align nicely with what we're going to talk about in terms of our transformative work on regulatory and business processes enabled by world-class technology that's award-winning. So it's interesting as regulators, obviously, we're there to manage risks, and we do it obviously within legislative mandates. And one of the most important things is, as you've heard commonly, a regulator has to remain current, as was said here. We don't want to lose our social license. We've got to evolve over time, and we've got to be able to respond to the changing environment. And obviously, you want to do that in the best efficient manner, but you don't want to compromise your mandate. There is a lot of common themes that you'll see that will emerge through our presentation that were already raised today. Certainty of outcome, transparency, clear and understandable regulations, risk-based approach. All of those things you'll see, these are common foundational elements that are built into the one-stop platform. Obviously, as regulators, you want to remain current. You don't want to be institutionally irrelevant because, like I say, you'll disappear. And in our current environment, as Tristan mentioned, there are, when a person applicant comes in, he goes through a process where, he's getting 30 approvals, he's submitting data over and over again. It's not really efficient. So what we've also learned is that we've gone away from that well-to-well pipeline infrastructure approach that's really scattered. It doesn't allow us to see the cumulative impacts on the landscape. So we're noticing people are now coming in more on a project-based approach. They are planning. Our stakeholders want to see the whole big picture on the landscape. They want to understand our decision-making process, what goes into it. They want to see the transparency. They want us to unlock that black box. And they want to be involved. They are obviously very sophisticated, and that's just part of the societal evolution that we've gone through. So as part of that, when we move forward with respect to the regulatory change, we're on this transformative course that Tristan and others have mentioned, what we call an integrated decision-making approach. We want to look things at holistically. So we're talking about one application, one review, one decision. It's a risk-based approach. We want to look at the entire life cycle, not just a point in the life cycle. We want to ensure that we understand the information we're gathering, how it applies across the entire life cycle. Are we directing our resources to those high-risk activities that really need to be regulated? And we're doing that with what we call One-Stop, a technology that we adapted. And I got to say, it wasn't something that we just came up with yesterday. This has been a process that has evolved over 5 years. We're able to, with Tristan and others, executive top cover, we're able to purchase world-class technologies, make sure that architect them to a point where 80% of what we're doing is just configured. So we're not custom coding. And you heard stuff like flexibility, agility. You'll see that this platform provides that, because I can tell you, over my years as a regulator, when I talk to industry, our industry colleagues, the number one thing that they come back forth and they say, we want regulatory certainty of outcome. We want to understand that when we put something in, we're either going to get it approved or we're going to get it denied. So really, what we're going to tell you is a story about how this technology is really enabling transformative regulatory processes. Shelley, anything you want to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I think we, go ahead.
Okay, so with that, I think we'll go to our a quick video, and then we'll just keep going through our storytelling.
Alberta has a rich history of oil and gas development. More than 100 years of this development has brought a lot of changes to our province. In the past, development was scattered across the landscape. From very remote locations to bustling communities, each project has different impacts on the environment and the people who live nearby.
The Alberta Energy Regulator, or the AER, reviews every proposed project and ensures all requirements are met before any decisions are made. Our job is to protect the public and the environment while ensuring economic benefits for all Albertans.
As our energy sector has evolved, projects have become larger and more complex. At the same time, Albertans' expectations have changed. They want more information about the projects that affect them.
And so the AER is moving forward. We are changing the way operators provide information about proposed projects and how we review and make decisions on energy development applications.
Today, the AER reviews applications for individual parts of an energy project. For example, a company might need to submit separate applications to drill a well, use storage tanks, build an access road, and put in a temporary pipeline to bring water during drilling. That's several different components of one project, each requiring one or more approvals.
Albertans from across the province have told us that this can be a frustrating experience. Local residents, municipalities, and Indigenous communities may receive several notices of applications for one energy project without knowing the end goal of the development. This can become even more complex when multiple projects occur in a specific area.
We're working on a new integrated approach, one that will see us review all aspects of a project in a single application, from start to finish, including how it will be built, how it will operate, and how and when it will eventually end with the land reclaimed.
To make this happen, many of our processes and systems need to change. This will take time, several years in fact, but when we achieve this goal, Albertans will be able to see the whole picture of a proposed energy project. It will be easier to find the project information and understand how a project may affect the environment and people who live nearby.
Why is this important? It allows us to improve our understanding of the full impact of an energy project and gather feedback from Albertans. This will help us make better decisions. We are talking to landowners, municipalities, Indigenous communities, and other Albertans to get their ideas on how this new approach could help them see the full scope of proposed projects and to explain how their questions and concerns will be addressed.
The result? We will manage the impacts of energy development in a more efficient way that considers all aspects of the project up front.
Over the past few years, we have tested and fine-tuned this integrated approach to energy development and the technology to support it. Our next step is to integrate pipeline applications and the information systems that receive them into one. One application, one review, one decision. To learn more, see the Integrated Pipeline Application video or check out the Alberta Energy Regulator at aer.ca.
It's a pretty fancy clip.
So I'm going to continue to build out, sort of paint that picture of what the old way of thinking was. You heard earlier from both Kim and Tristan about the AER was formed 5 years ago. And so if you can imagine what was brought together, 3 different regulators, each with their own systems, each with their own processes. And so when we became the AER, industry then had to submit to various different places depending on which of the 32 applications they were applying for. So that was really part of the old way of thinking. It was disjointed, it was inefficient. Companies would submit piecemeal applications one at a time into some system that would feed one of various databases. And we then, as the regulator, would then, in isolation, review and make a decision on that one specific slice of the energy project. The new way of thinking, you've heard our sort of tagline, a single application, a single review, and a single decision. So that's really what our end goal is. So the new way of thinking is higher level, bigger picture, and possibly most important, what we would call a public notice. So rather than multiple times the public being sort of bombarded with these very small slivers of what is included in the energy development, they see that big picture and they get one notice explaining what that is, and then we interact at that level. For industry, it is absolutely more efficient. For the communities, it explains sort of what it actually is intended to be, what the activity is on the landscape. And overall, One Stop enables that integration piece. So again, looking at all the data, no matter where you are in the life cycle of that project, in the AER, you're looking at that same piece of data, which will eventually, once we build it up great enough, will lead us to better cumulative effects management.
So we think of One Stop as really revolutionary. I mean, when I think of a revolution, I think of something abrupt, something violent, and a complete change. One Stop certainly isn't violent, but I can tell you it's brought about a huge both change in the way we regulate the behavior of our industry. Also internally, it's really focused our work on the high-risk areas, the high-risk projects. So let's not kid ourselves. It's been a change management. Also, we've had to retrain some of our staff that are moving away from some of the administrative tasks into the more technically complex areas. We know, as Tristan mentioned, we're in an environment where capital moves across borders and it moves quickly. If you've got a regulatory environment that isn't responsive, it moves. So we do have a mandate recently to move on regulatory efficiency. One Stop is just one aspect of that. Again, I got to make it very clear that we're not compromising our environment, but what we're providing to industry and our stakeholders, again, is data that you only use once, data that's really used in the decision making. So we're not capturing data that's irrelevant or it sits there for years. We're using a system that's intuitive, it's easy to use, it's self-informed, it tells people how to walk through it. Again, it provides certainty because applicants are going to know when they file. They're going to know before they press the button, are they going down the path of routine or non-routine, high risk, low risk. So they know exactly. It also allows them to build out their applications before they get there. Obviously, it is about cost savings, both internally and externally to industry, to our own folks. We're in it, we're in a competitive environment. We've got to emphasize that. So it is about time savings. It's about application turnaround. And at the same time, though, as we've heard over and over when we went out and consulted with folks on this, it is really ensuring that we continue with our mandate of public safety and environmental protection. So when we went out, when we were across the provinces, I would have thought, when you hear about streamlining, you hear about efficiencies, we thought that stakeholders, or at least I did it sometimes, we thought that stakeholders aren't going to really be receptive to this. But actually, when we started to explain to them about the benefits, about being able to see cumulative impacts, being able to be involved, starting to understand how we come to a decision, and Shelley and I will talk about our risk rules and how those are published on our website, so people understand how regulators are starting to make their decisions. It was a real win, and we've really got quite strong support across the province on this transformative work. So yeah, it is revolutionary, and there's a win for everybody. There's a win for government, there's a win for all of our stakeholders, and there's an internal win for efficiency. So it is a total package.
Can I interject just with a quick question? I think so. Everyone kind of counts on industry to be the ones being innovative and efficient. And no one would argue that industry is not more efficient, more innovative than government, kind of on the whole. But that doesn't preclude government from taking steps like this to be innovative, efficient. But what was the actual motivation, or what was the push? Was that something internally from the AER? Was it an outside push, or how because you've got to persuade your stakeholders and government that you're going to take a risk, you're going to invest in new technology that you think are going to deliver more efficient, better environmental outcomes. But how does that actually, because what we heard earlier today is there's a little bit of thumb twiddling from regulators on the process. How did you guys persuade your masters to do so?
Ben, can you back up a second? They said that there were 3 agencies were combined. Did that require a provincial law change, or?
The the Responsible Energy Development Act. We used to have
What year was that?
2013. Yeah.
And what were the 3 prior agencies?
Alberta Environments, Sustainable Resource Development, and the Energy Resources Conservation Board, all with distinct mandates for the upstream oil and gas.
Prior to that, we managed upstream, but there were other elements, environmental jurisdiction, public lands, Water Act, that were held by other regulators. And as part of that competitiveness piece, when we were formed, it was to bring it all into one regulator.
I think to answer Ben's question, though,
That
there
fits
was,
with, I think, his
yeah,
question,
there was
yeah.
the political imperative and the political will to change, but there is also a lot of push internally to change, realizing what was coming down in terms of energy development, technological innovation. And also, we work constantly with our stakeholders, whether it's industry and others. There's always that push-pull to change. And as a regulator, again, I want to make it clear that if you want to survive, you've got to have that will to change and accommodate things within your mandate.
Maybe just a comment for our colleagues in Mexico and the United States. It would be similar to taking FERC and then adding in parts of the EPA or others to really focus and hone on whatever you're really interested in regulating. So in our case, in Alberta, we had a focus on hydrocarbon development. And so we wanted to put everything in one shop and then make that more efficient while still sort of getting those outcomes. So that was the idea.
Maybe if I can just comment as well, while there was, the change and the AER was formed, it did take some really, I'd say, innovative, progressive thinking sort of at the leadership level to allow us to, first of all, to create sort of this opportunity, but also to test it and to be willing to take a little bit of risk and see what would happen in a safe space before we actually moved it out. So there's definitely strong leadership there as well.
I think there's 2 other pieces to what Shelley's saying. When we talk about a recipe for success, definitely it's top cover, but also it's really the ability of the operational folks, the regulatory folks to work with IT, because we've come to realize that if we want to stay in the game, regulators have to become digital, and pairing that business with the IT, that's what gives you really the strength and the power of what we're doing.
But anyway, sorry, I've kind of slowed down the process or the presentation by interjecting. I see a question there, but what's your preference? Do you want to do?
No, we'll take questions along the way.
Okay, yeah, and is it Martin or Martin? Yeah.
The competing mandate question, often the way regulatory agencies are divided because we don't want competing mandates within one regulatory agency. I assume that debate happened in Alberta. And in the United States, sometimes we split agencies, sometimes we combine them for efficiency. How did the competing mandate resolve debate? Or how was that resolved, or the consensus reached?
So the debate was ongoing, going way back to 1995, something called the McNichol report that said we need to amalgamate a lot of the ministries with the regulator to have a single regulator, a full life cycle regulator. That never really went anywhere. We had a subsequent UOGP report that again talked about the single regulator, getting those regulatory efficiencies. And it just evolved over time, and finally we got to a point where it was really the political driver and the whole thing about competitiveness that Tristan and others have talked to, and enhancing assurance. And it was really ensuring that we're a competitive jurisdiction and having that political realization, and that's what drove it over the goal line. But it was a long debate
But to
over
that-
the years.
yeah. To that point, there, when we were formed, there was a lot of people that felt it was a conflicting mandate.
Yeah.
Because but I think what kind of saved our bacon on that one is we don't promote. We're not in the debate on hydrocarbon development. We exist because the government of Alberta has decided to develop this resource. Our job is to make sure it's safe, sufficient, environmentally responsible, and that there's economic benefit delivered back to Albertans as a result. So what we did, those transparency pieces were first out of the gate to reassure Albertans that this new competitive, efficient regulator was not sacrificing the outcomes that meant a lot to them. And that took time. That's why you couldn't have done IDA in 2013. You could do it in 2017 because we were sitting on strong performance scores, strong confidence, and a citizenry that really trusted the regulator to do the right thing.
Okay, I want to see a few more slides because I sidetracked us, but.
So again, I'm not sure what's going to appear on the slide, but again, we've when we went into the transformation bit, obviously because we are a single regulator, we want to get there. We wanted to get away from old legacy multiple systems. We had dozens of them, and we want to transform it into one digital system where industry just submits their stuff and it's approved, instead of going through multiple systems, having to re-enter the data multiple times. So again, as we're moving through the development of One Stop, we are retiring these legacy systems. Obviously, it was cumbersome, and at some time it still is cumbersome till we build out the entire system. We've probably got another 2 years to build out the entire life cycle from geophysical to reclamation and remediation. And like I say, it's going to focus on the broader project-based approach as opposed to well-by-well basis. So truly, we think it's revolutionary. Like I say, at some point in time in the future, we're going to draw on societal and economic factors in our decision-making. Right now, we're just building out the transactional foundation. And as we finish that, we're then going to start incorporating some of the cumulative impacts into our decision-making process and the societal benefits and risks in our decision-making. So right now, it's really a foundational building exercise.
So I'm going to jump into some of the nitty-gritty details of how we're going about doing this. So really, this is more than just a new application process. It's changing the way we're making decisions. We're making decisions that are now based on, they're risk-informed. So ultimately, there's an event that takes place in the platform, in the system, and based on the risk of what's being applied for, it would take one of two paths, either an automatic path or what we would call a high risk or a baseline or an additional review. So ultimately what that means is, do any of our technical experts need to look at this or not? And that's sort of a decision point within the system, which then, to go back to a comment that Carlos said, it allows us to maximize that effectiveness of our limited resources, our expertise, allowing them to actually focus in those areas. So what the system does is it has a complex set of rules and validations, both to determine which path it should go on, but also the administrative completeness of that application. Does it meet our minimum requirements or doesn't it? So I'll give you a couple of examples. Maybe first, before I go, the risk rules are ultimately based on there's three different buckets that we look at when we develop what we call our risk rules or assessment rules. It's location-based, operator-based, and activity-based. And so maybe I'll talk through a couple of examples just to speak to each of those. So the first one would be, let's say, a sweet gas well on flat, private land where the landowner has actually signed off consent to the activity, and there is no sensitive species in or close by. So that would, when you're thinking of a location, there's no sensitive species, there's no spatial additional sort of requirements that would need to be met. The operator in this case, I guess we could assume in that there's landowner consent. We would anticipate that being good. But if there was an operator issue, that would be taken into consideration. And then the activity, a sweet gas well. And in this example, you would assume, the example would be that it would meet all requirements and there was no variances requested. So based on that, in the system through the validations and the risk rules would be able to determine whether or not it meets minimum requirements or whether they're asking for any additional variances or putting forward any alternative mitigations. And in this case, they don't. It would not need to be seen by anyone. It would, the computer system itself would validate it and it could be automatically approved. If we look at a higher risk example, something like maybe an existing multi-well thermal project, where potentially there's steam injection into a single well bore. Maybe this company has a history of production incidents, and maybe it's in a location where there's some caribou range issues or plans that we need to take into consideration. So again, the information would be submitted into the system, and based on the rules that we would create, whether they be spatially driven or through the data that is actually collected through the screens, we'd be able to determine that based on a number of things in that situation, location potentially, if there's caribou range plans that we need to consider, operator, if there was quite a few production-related incidents in there, or the activity itself, just the fact that it's steam injection, multi-wells, and into a single well bore. So those three things there, we would actually put that off, and as a result of all the automation, our now very technical staff have more time to actually look in detail at this specific project instead of trying to deal with the volume that exists in the old administrative processes.
So maybe just a couple of comments for the folks in the room that are regulators. This effect that, to be honest, what's happening here is we're stealing ideas from Google and others, and we're preloading with algorithms, and that gives us an ability to introduce other concepts once you've got this build. And what I'm really saying there is the system has a learning capability. It will actually start to pick up depending on where the government or people in positions of high levels of authority send us. So it has this amazing ability to react very, very rapidly. That's the agile piece to this and really the secret sauce. It's only secret in a regulatory space. We just we 3M'd it. We stole it from people that are smarter than us. So that's the key to this actually as you go forward.
Also to note, it is real time. So company is entering in their information and they can validate, and you'll see later on, they can validate page by page. They know whether or not it's administratively complete as they're actually entering it in. They know whether it's going to go which path, whether it's going to be automated or whether it's going to be looked at by our staff right away before they even submit it. So very transparent. And of course, because we know every application's unique, the system doesn't make the decisions for us, but the system does choose the path by which the review will take place or the review will follow. Because we are automating, we have also instituted quite a rigorous back-end audit process. So our first project, our pilot, which we went forward with, was on our reclamation certificates. And through that process, we've done quite an in-depth audit review of both the information that was submitted, both through desktop and field audits, as well as the system itself. How are those rules working? What are the validations catching what they should be? And 100% sort of result. The audit process as well in the field has caught a couple of things that we wouldn't have caught otherwise. But again, because the staff are no longer doing the administrative task, they can be out in the field and actually catch those things. So again, moving us to be a more effective regulator. So what can it do? So really when we are looking at, again, phasing it in, we are looking at a couple of things. So where are highest volumes and where are those really high administrative tasks when we're looking at return on investment to get there as quickly as possible? We also had a number of backlogs. There was a question, I forget where it came, but what helped sort of gain the momentum and we had a number of backlogs. We didn't have enough staff to actually meet our timelines. And so that started people starting to, think in an innovative way. How can we actually manage this? So with that, this is what is currently can be submitted through what we call One Stop. So all pipeline applications, whether it's for new construction or the amendments, those are all in the system now. All our reclamation certificates are in the system, as well as all our Water Act approvals, not water use, but water approvals for impacts to water bodies. And as well, we've just added our inspection process in. So now we can interact with industry to gather that information on those detailed site inspections. Paul alluded to the fact that we're phasing this in. Obviously, there's a number of activities that we need to actually put into the system. And as we incrementally step this out, the integration, and really that's where the power of IDA and One Stop is, that integration, that getting to the big project thinking, higher level, being able to look at it and share information across. And so that's, again, as we add more to the system, that becomes more powerful.
So as a regulator, this may sound a little bit different, but we're looking for return on investment on our internal investment. And when we look and transform, we work with our stakeholders. We want to know what the pain points are. So from a regulatory perspective, we want to solve specific regulatory problems, but we also want to know what are we going to get in terms of our ROI. I can tell you that when we first initiated One Stop, we solved it was alluded to here by my colleague, we wanted to solve a huge backlog on reclamation certificate applications. They're in the thousands, and they had been around after we had merged with the other government departments, so we had picked up that legacy backlog. And we did the project within 120 days. This was the first time we tested the technology. We were able to clear out the backlog within, once it went live, within 15 minutes, we're able to issue, based on that risk-based approach, 80% of the applications went routine, and they were approved immediately. But again, on a $1.6 million investment, we're able to ascertain $7 million in direct cost savings to industry, plus another $75 million in deferred costs. So we're looking at what is it that we can save, and what specific business problem can we actually solve. And the cost savings that we get, they're actually verified through our industry associations. They have certain, obviously, business formulas that they apply, and we obviously have our own internal calculations, but for validity and verification, because at some point in time, the Auditor General will come along and say, okay, what have you done? Can you verify this? We actually get third parties to verify the cost savings. So we are looking at efficiency gains. I think in what Shelley was speaking at, to date, we've been able to automate 70% of our applications through One Stop, and I think that's about 4,800 of them as of January 19. Certainly, obviously, you can imagine the staff reduction in turnaround times. We've gone from days and hours to minutes, and we'll just get to some of the stats in a moment. But again, we're also being able to, we have specific timelines on our manual high-risk application turnaround times, so we're sticking to those. So again, operators know that if it goes that non-routine manner, they're looking at 30, 60, 90 days. It's actually ingrained. So we've got service levels with our industry. Again, it goes to certainty of outcome, so they know that it's not gone into a black box as previously. So again, it is about savings, it is about time and money, and it is about ROI. These are just some of the dramatic reductions that we had in terms of reclamations. Certificate applications, again, the whole backlog was eliminated. As you can see, in terms of percentages for high risk, we've had a 75% turnaround reduction, 83% for low risk. Again, and what we've been able to do, there's never been a backlog since we're current. So it comes in, obviously Shelley spoke to the PNOA, PNOD, I mean, if it's approved, they're approved immediately, we hold them for another 30 days, because that's a legislative mandate for notice of application, and then they're issued immediately. And we went from, you know, like I say, for 75% of them, we went from over a year of review to literally 30 days. So that's impressive on the high risk. We went probably from 180 days to 31 days. So again, you're seeing that efficiency, that certainty of outcome, and how these things are handled.
That's an incredible reduction. If I could get my calorie count down that fast in a year, I'd be. But any concern at all? Have any stakeholders said, "Hey, you're moving too fast"? I mean, it's still 60 days for a review, but you know, going from 400 to 60, has there been any pushback on that?
There wasn't, surprisingly, and we knew there wouldn't be, because as Kim and others have stated, we do a lot of engagement, both at the design, the build, and the test stage, with landowners, with government, with industry. So we actually involve them all the way through the process. It doesn't come as a surprise. And we do focus group testing, all of that. So when we were going to roll this out on the reclamation piece, we actually went to a lot of the NGOs and some of the stakeholders, like our Farmers Advocate, and they basically said, this is a good thing. Issue them all at once. We were thinking of phasing it, because we were worried about, is there going to be a backlash from the rural community? Because they get obviously lease payments. And when you get a reclamation certificate, it takes away their lease payments. So they're not getting the money. But, you know, we got full agreement from the communities, get this and keep it going. Because there was a big environmental gain to this. We're able to return land to its original land use capability, or very equivalent. So having that environmental, returning land to the land base, that was significant for us too. So no, there was not pushback. So pipelines, again, similar statistics. You know, in the old system, we were putting out pipeline applications. We were doing the authorizations from 6 days. We're down to 2 now. And that's 99% of the applications that come in. On some of the non-routine or the high risk, again, we're going from months and many months to, again, probably a 30-day turnaround. So again, significant reductions in timelines. And again, to Shelley's point, on those, we're only looking at what's triggered the risk rules, and we're just focusing a very focused review of those applications. And that's the critical part. We're not opening it up again. We're not looking at it from end to end. We're looking at the specific risk rules that need to be addressed.
So Paul talked a bit before about really putting a focus on the user experience and really, you know, eliminating a lot of the burden and the annoyance of all the systems that everyone was using. So getting to an intuitive, easy to use system, really focused on information sharing, both internally between teams, but also externally with industry and the public. And as a regulator, taking the guesswork out of it, providing certainty and clarity in what the requirements are and what actually needs to be answered before actually submitting an application. We like to say basically lifting the curtain on that black box, which as a regulator we hear about quite often.
So public access, one of the real neat things about it is we have a GIS component. So as the public, you're able to see in real time as these things are approved, what's pending, what reclamation certificates have been issued. You're actually able to, going forward, to subscribe if you're interested in a given area to see, I want to be notified of all the pending authorizations, pending reclamation application, incidents. So the public has a real view into what's happening in their environment. That's critical. Again, this gives them the ability to see what's happening from a big picture point of view. It goes again to confidence. People know what's happening on the landscape. They're able to assess it, make the decisions that are critical to their own way of whether they want to be involved, whether they want to file a statement of concern or not, but allows them to see what the decision maker is doing. Likewise, when I say public, it also, the industry in the past they could never figure out where the application is in the queue. And right now, the industry folks know exactly as it's progressing to the system because they get notifications. So having that transparency to the public and our industry operators, it's critical. As Shelley has said, it does away with the black box mentality. But more importantly, it goes to transparency, and that's critical for us.
I think next what I'm going to do is we're going to walk through a couple of screenshots. I'll go through them. I won't take too much time because then we're actually going to watch a video that's going to take you through the workflow from the industry perspective. So this here, what you're seeing is just the homepage. Again, the idea here is it's web-based. It should be very intuitive. As an industry or a member of the public, everything you need, whether it be videos on how to use it or how to submit it, or the actual access to the system, you would get to from this page here. So this is just an example of exactly how clear and how concise the information is that we're asking for. So we're asking a number of yes/no questions. Those yes/no questions drive the path that those applications are going to take. The other thing that you'll see in the video is that depending if you do say yes or no to some questions, there are additional questions that you'll need to ask or things that you'll need to provide in order to help the manual review in those cases. As well, just wanted to show you guys that left-hand navigation. Just like any of those other web-based tax forms or whatever it is that we use, you can see where you are in the process and you can toggle between the different areas, just like a normal sort of web-based form that you would use for any other submission type, such as taxes. So next, here's an example of one of our longer drop-down menus. But again, if we have a finite number of choices, we're just going to give them to the industry and allow them to choose what they need to, rather than hoping they spell something right or what have you. See?
Is there an 800 number you can call if you don't understand something on there?
We're producing videos. There is a 1-800 number, but we're producing YouTube videos
Or
that people can
some
watch.
crazy, what you want isn't on the list, or you don't see it. For example, you call it something different than is on your list. Say, hey, I have a spigot. The spigot's not listed here. What do I use?
Yes, and I think that's an important point. While we're making our regulatory process as efficient as possible, it's not meant to remove the human element from the regulatory process. And so for those situations, you've always got someone on the other end of the call or the other end of the phone. So this is one of my favorite ones. So this is what you're seeing here is a list of, it says assessment rules in the middle, but that is basically those risk rules I was talking about. So if you can imagine industry, they've gone in, they've submitted they've entered all their application information, they've validated it all, and now what they've done is they run their risk rules before they submit. So fully transparent, no more black box. This is before they've actually submitted it to us. It's in draft form. They'll see right away whether or not it's going to be an automatic approval or not, and for what reason. And they can then, based on that information, submit it and with certainty know sort of what timeline they can expect to hear back from us with. And the decisions, whether it's an approval or not, published right away as soon as we hit it, and also more accessible. So accessible to the public, accessible to industry, accessible to everybody as soon as we actually make that decision.
So a couple of comments here for folks from Brookings that are interested in, you're going to hear comments of regulators, how are you making any of these decisions? Like, what is going on in there? Or if you've been in FERC at a senior level, the reality is it's tough to figure out what's actually happening in this very quiet, non-transparent cube. So I think what Shelley's trying to get across here, and I recognize we're into quite a bit of detail, but in behind this, actually, there's a boatload of detail that would bore most of us in this room, actually. The practical reality is, if someone wants to click on a button and say, I don't understand why you issued this, you can actually click on it, and it will say exactly, we considered, here are the 12 factors we looked at, these ones we considered low risk, these ones we considered high risk, and this is the reason we made these decisions. So every decision is defensible up into a Supreme Court. Everything is highly transparent for all stakeholders, and it's sort of driving that. It's not reflected in this, but that's kind of from a philosophical perspective as a regulator, you're desperately trying to get to that, but yet you have a million pieces to process in a year. That's kind of how you do it. But that was the idea anyway.
So we walked through some of the sort of key features, and now what we're going to do is we're going to play a video of the workflow. Keeping in mind this is from the industry perspective, and it's going to start after they've entered in their original contact details.
what type of activity they are applying for. In this instance, it's new construction of a pipeline on a new license. Next, OneStop asks for additional information about the application. These questions are specific to the activity being applied for. OneStop will also prompt you if more details are required for an answer that you select. Next, OneStop will take you through the activity details of the application. You can see that the drop-down menus continue to guide you along the process, and the yes or no answer format allows you to answer the questions that the system requires. OneStop provides the ability to upload a shapefile containing the spatial data into the system. It only takes a minute or two for the file to be uploaded and viewable on the map viewer. The map contains many layers that you can customize for your viewing experience. Next, you are able to provide the details of the pipeline you wish to build. Again, the use of the drop-down menus allows an applicant to easily select their answers. You can either download the pipe specifications into OneStop via a CSV file, or you can choose to enter the pipe specifications directly into the system. OneStop will not allow you to continue if you've entered incorrect or invalid information, as seen here when the applicant tries unsuccessfully to validate their pipeline. The system will tell you where your error has occurred and why, giving you the opportunity to go back and re-enter the correct information. In this example, the pipe material is not correct. Based on the information you have provided already about the pipeline, relevant technical questions will appear on this screen in the same yes or no answer format. Once all of the information has been collected, OneStop displays the assessment rules and indicates which rules may have triggered additional review. On your landing page, you can view your recent activity in OneStop, including draft, submitted, approved, and denied applications. For this demo application, we can filter the view and can see that it's now moved from the submitted queue to the approved queue. Once approved, the license documents are available for you to download.
So that's an example, I guess, of that's a pipeline example. But we've got a lot more going on, I guess, that we're going to be adding into OneStop, and I'll let
Sure.
Paul tell you about those.
Yeah, I think we're on a multi-year program, transformative program here, and I think the two most critical elements that we're going to tackle next is obviously the methane emissions reporting, which is obviously mandated by government. You heard a lot of discussion about that this morning. By the end of the year, we want to make sure that we have the ability to capture it, know from which specific emissions are coming from, right down to the equipment source. So we'll have that type of capability. So that's something that's very critical to us to make sure that we have that. The other thing where we're going to test the full integration across the life cycle is public land. So we're going to test wells, facilities, pipelines, other infrastructure within the public lands. And that will really prove out the integrative nature of the technology and the regulatory transformation. Obviously, by the time we're done, we want to make sure that we've got transactional automation right across from geophysical right to reclamation and remediation. So it is transformative. It's like I say, we couldn't do it without executive top cover. And again, I think the real win here is the technology is sort of a plug and play. So you can and the way it's been architectured, so you can take well in facilities or something else and literally plug it in with the appropriate risk rules, and it works. And that's the real secret of this, is the ability to plug in different modules as you go along without a whole lot of custom coding. And that's the real efficiency here. So by the time we're done, we're probably going to invest $50 to $60 million and probably an ROI close to $500 million in industry savings. That's just a rough estimate. So it is truly transformative.
Wow, yeah, no, so I've never been on the industry side of the fence and tried to apply for one of these things, but I did tried to get Ontario to send me my driving record, my driver's abstract. I had to fax them, then they had to fax me, and so, and that was just, and I didn't have a bad driving record. It was perfectly flawless.
I'm sure.
But it'd be a shame if you stayed to the end of the day and then didn't get to ask your question. One thing, we do promise to get everyone out on time, but some folks might have questions in the room about the technology. Any regulators? Is there any burning questions for Paul and Shelley?
I have a question from industry. How long did it take you to get to today?
So we bought the technology 5 years ago, and we had to start playing with it. We had to really configure it and make sure we've got the appropriate architecture.
Really about a year and a half.
Yeah, from implementation.
And what have you found to be more difficult, the IT part or the workflow with the people behind it?
Fucking people.
Definitely the change management
management.
aspects. And I would say not just internally, but also on the industry side.
Who owns the software? You guys, or is there a service? So if state of Wisconsin wanted to use it, would they contact you, or is there a vendor that has it? Who's the license?
So we bought the licenses from a third-party vendor named OpenText. They're a world-class technology company.
So if somebody wanted
We
this, they
own
could
the
just contact them and.
Well, yeah, but we own the intellectual property behind that as to how to architect this and build it out. I don't think there's another regulator that would know how to do that. That's the real secret.
Okay.
You can buy the technology, but if you don't know how to configure it, and that was the real discovery by our own teams, is how to put it all together. And that's where we're getting the accolades and the architecture awards worldly, because we figured out what we'll call the secret sauce, that intellectual property to make it all work.
It's basically a technology stack. And the secret sauce is how they interact with one another, not just that you have
The
them all.
question is, can you commercialize that?
Yeah, I'll be frank, this is a hot topic internally in the AER from a perspective that, is there something we've got here? So there are patents that have been put on some of this, that's moving now. You can there's about 5 technologies you use, and actually say OpenText doesn't exist, you just throw in another dynamic case management system. It's the linkages between those things. That's the sort of secret sauce here. And so, yeah, we have patented it, and we are testing it actually in different venues around the world. And the idea of that is, if we can actually sell this, I'll be frank, it will help our government and the industry we're regulating, because it would reduce the taxation burden effectively.
Yeah, question, Martin?
Yes, at least in the US, typically government IT projects frequently fail because we want to configure the IT system to exactly match our work process. And it seemed that you pretty much were able to make the system match your work process pretty closely. Or was there a lot of process change? And my agency in particular, we've wasted more than $60 million on failed projects, so.
So I can,
Go ahead,
yeah.
Shelley.
So a couple of different things. One is when Paul was talking about the coding before, so really that customization. If you think of sort of the technology stack, it's only in the very top layer. The rest of it is not customized. So when you're customizing the screens, it's just in that very top layer. So you're not, it's not, like our legacy systems are hard coded and you can't get a change to save your life because it's all the way down. Whereas this is just that very top layer. We also did a lot of work, years of work in preparation to get to this point, looking at our business architecture before we actually configured the work. But it's done at such a high level at a workflow level that, you know, basically you receive something, you review something, you make a decision, and there's some other output. Like, it's at a very, very high level to allow that customization at the very
And
top.
it's adaptable for changes in that workflow.
Absolutely.
To some extent, I think the answer to your question is probably, it's a blend of both. You got to be able to have some executive leadership say to your working staff, those technical people that are passionate about what they do, they're going to have to flex a bit, but they don't have to flex on the things that are really a big issue, because that would be inappropriate. But if it's, well, I'm used to checking the box, and I have to check that box. Really, are you sure? Why do you need that box? And there's an actual process, a facilitated process with regulatory analysts, people that have like MPAs and MPPs, and you'll walk engineers and scientists and people like this through this process to say, let me understand what that box does. What does that red light blinking do? Oh, it's very important, extremely important. Yeah, I know, but what does it do? And there's a bit of a conversation like that. But if it's valid, it goes in. But what you'll find generally is you can't replicate like for like. It won't work. So you have to have some pressure from above, right at the very top of the organization, to sort of say, folks, we're going in this direction. And if you're going to do it, you end up not being overly popular at times. So.
And to Shelley's point, the change management was huge on it, working staff, getting their heads. But I think the success of the reclamation pilot really, everybody, and especially when the results of the back end audit, because, you know, it went through and then everybody went, wow, that was great. So,
Definitely help build momentum.
Yeah.
Okay, I see one question in the back. I'm also going to open it to the room. This is your last chance to get your questions in, but these guys will be hanging around too. So if anyone wants to tag on to what Tom Huffaker from Exxon has to say, please do.
I'll just ask this half as a quip, half so everyone in the room knows his backstory, but also seriously, how helpful was it that you had an experienced armor commander at the top of the house?
Honestly, it was very useful. This is hard freaking work from all sorts of perspectives. I won't, it does, once you get into it and once you start producing the results, it is interesting to sit in a room and to have fairly strong First Nation or ENGO support sitting with industry, and everyone's sort of nodding their head going, yep, we can see value in this. Yep, we agree. There's little things. There are still some things we gotta, but internally it is tough to practically do this work, just like it would be in any of your organizations. It's to use the modern term, change management. It's big, yeah. And it helps having someone that
Who's the armor commander? Is that Shelley?
that is Jim Ellis, a former combat tank commander.
and that helps every day on every issue.
Yeah, it really does, actually.
I just remember in some discussion years ago, Jim saying, yeah, I know everybody's really stressed out, but for me, any day that no one is trying to, quote, kill any of my people.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
It's not that stressful.
Exactly. You do tourism in Afghanistan.
Well, go ahead, Paul.
No, Tom, Jim's really great. I mean, he gives the strategic intent, and then you got people like Tristan and others who protect us, and we just run, right? And it's great to have that. They just give us the latitude to move and get this stuff done. So I think that's another combination, having that executive oversight with that vision and that determination to get things done. It's critical.
What Tom said, any day is a good day when you're not fighting a tank battle, I think. But we can also say today is a really good day. It's beautiful outside. You guys have been a delightful audience. Thanks for staying to the end. That's the way you get invited back to the Wilson Center. And I know I brought up baseball for a reason, too. I think Shelley, Paul, Tristan, Kim, and Sam, who've been just fantastic partners to work with and convene this conversation for the AER. I think they're headed to the Nationals game this weekend, so if you're there in the park and you want to have a beer and learn a little bit more about the technology, come say hi to them, and they'll be around afterwards. So thank you, guys. Give yourself a round of applause, and to Paul and Shelley.
Thanks, Paul.
Oh, you mean the Expos? You go see the Expos.
That's